Hi everyone, Joe Kral, President of the Society of St. Sebastian, and again, welcome to this edition of Pro-Life University. Before we get started on our topic today, just some quick prayers for those that are out there. All of us in some way or fashion are affected by this pandemic. Many of us are at home, obviously trying to raise our kids and keeping some sort of semblance of a normal life. Some people have lost their jobs. We need to pray for them. And certainly there are many people out there that have gotten sick with the COVID-19 virus. They need our prayers as well. We need prayers for our nation that we can come together and heal, that when this pandemic does break and we're able to continue our life, that our nation can recover as well. These are all important sorts of things. So again, if you haven't been praying for these sorts of things, please do so, because it's vitally important that we do such a thing. Prayer is a powerful weapon, and certainly the Gospels tell us the power of prayer rather frequently. So please, keep these folks in mind and in your hearts, and certainly in your prayers as well. Today, what we're going to talk about is a little bit more about in vitro fertilization and some things that are going on with respect to this particular topic. Now, I know I've talked about this particular issue, in vitro fertilization, or IVF for short, in other past videos. And again, I'm going to sort of maintain that position as I should, because as a pro-life position, in vitro fertilization is highly problematic from a moral perspective. It certainly gets into the issue of sexual ethics, and again, I'm not going to spend too much time on the sexual ethics of it. Certainly myself as a Catholic, and certainly as the Catholic Church teaches, that in vitro fertilization is essentially an evil act, because it takes away from the unitive and procreative aspect of the couple coming together and creating life. But nonetheless, not getting so much into that, we can certainly argue that after life is created, many in the IVF industry tend to treat these embryonic children in their most vulnerable and earliest of stages of existence in life. They treat them as mere property, as mere things to be used for whatever particular purpose. And we know many of them get created and many of them are destroyed. So the first thing I definitely want to certainly say in regards to this is, interestingly enough, we've been talking about abortion clinics for the last two videos. Pretty much the IVF industry as a whole, globally speaking, has shut down. And again, this is a good. One of the things that we need to understand is during this time, the IVF industry is unable to create more embryos or more embryonic children that will eventually be destroyed. This is a good. This is a good thing. Destroying life, human life, at any stage, whether it's the earliest stage embryo or if it's an elderly person, is always morally wrong, period. Right? So right now, we're definitely seeing many of these in vitro fertilization clinics shutting down. And interestingly enough, unlike the abortion clinics, many of these IVF clinics are voluntarily shutting down. The abortion clinics, as we all are aware, are busy trying to stay open. In fact, they're still suing the state of Texas with respect to trying to stay open and perform some sorts of abortions as well. So again, interestingly enough, it's certainly a comparison and contrast that at least the in vitro fertilization industry has some concern for human life, particularly its staff and the patients that come in, whereas they obviously don't have the concern for the embryonic life. They have at least some concern, whereas with the abortion clinics, we're obviously seeing little to absolutely zero concern for any human life, for staffers, for obviously the women, and certainly the unborn children that are being killed in abortions. So that's one aspect that's going on. So one of the things that, just to update you on, is that these clinics are closed pretty much globally for the time being during this time of pandemic. And again, I think this is a great opportunity for us to at least educate folks out there how this is a good thing. And I know that for some couples, because I've certainly read a lot of articles about people who are concerned, I may not be able to get pregnant again since they're at a certain age limit and so forth. But again, we got to understand there are many viable options out there that are life-affirming options for couples that are suffering from infertility. And the most obvious option out there, of course, is adoption. And we got to remember there are a lot of adoption agencies and a lot of children out there that need to be adopted at various ages. One of the things that we fundamentally need to realize, and I think that it's really important, is that we do have an obligation to try to go out and help these children in various ways, whether that's obviously donating to the adoption agency, foster care, or even adoption itself. All right, that's certainly something that we all need to look at seriously in our own lives as well. Now, kind of moving on to a different subject here, one of the things I wanted to bring to mind is the fact that since we're in the middle of this pandemic, there are various states that have passed and governors have signed legislation. And a lot of it has kind of been, I guess you could say, pushed aside just for the fact that, obviously everyone's concerned about the pandemic and what's going on regarding the pandemic. Well, just a few weeks ago, or actually a little less than a few weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, the state of Utah had a bill signed. It was House Bill 214. And I've talked about this particular bill before, and I want to talk about it again because I think it's vitally important to, one, help educate fellow pro-lifers on this issue. Two, having those pro-lifers go out and educate their legislators on this particular issue as well. Now, House Bill 214, what was it? It seemed innocuous enough. If you were to actually look at the bill, you probably would be like, well, what does this have to do with being pro-life? And how is this bill, interestingly enough, how is this bill, contra life? Well, the bill seems simple enough. Basically, it would provide Medicaid funds, those are state funds, to couples who suffer from certain genetic, I guess you could say, abnormalities, cystic fibrosis and some other various sorts of genetic diseases, which are passed on, from generation to generation. And it would provide them with funds for in vitro fertilization and, help them receive money for in vitro fertilization so they could get pregnant. Now, the clincher here is this. Now, if you were to look at this and you're like, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with it from a purely pro-life perspective? Well, here's the particular problem. Typically, what happens in these cases where you have a couple that comes in because one of them suffers from a genetic disposition, they will create a number of embryos, and they test those embryos to see if they have that genetic abnormality. Now, those embryonic children that are tested and get a positive test results, meaning that they have that particular genetic abnormality, are then destroyed. All right. So, in essence, what we have here is a bill where life is created, state funds pay for that creation of life, and then what happens is the state then also funds the destruction of that particular life as well, if it tests positive for having a genetic abnormality. All right. Now, there's no other way to put it. Right? This is a bill that blatantly, and I mean blatantly, practices eugenics. There's no other way, or there's literally no other way to put it. This is the proper word for this bill. And this bill was actually signed into law. And what's truly disconcerting, what is truly sad is, and truly terrible, was this was a pro-life governor. Utah has a pro-life governor. He is very much against abortion and wants to sign pro-life laws regarding abortion. Well, that's a good, all right? We certainly celebrate him for that. We thank him for those sorts of efforts that he's done and those actions of signing those particular pro-life bills into law. Thank you. But again, here we see something where, this really shows a need for us as pro-life advocates to go out there and let them know that the human embryonic child is indeed a human being, deserving of protection. Now, one of the basic things that we always say about being pro-life is, and again, it's just common. We always say that life begins at conception. And now, if that's the case, if life begins at conception, it doesn't matter if that conception takes place within the womb or within the petri dish. The simple fact is it's human life. Geography doesn't determine human life. What happens between the sperm and the egg cell determines what becomes human life. So when the egg cells fertilize at that moment by the sperm cell, we have conception. And at that moment, we have human life. It's a new beginning. It doesn't matter about the geography. It's just a simple, not only scientific biological reality, it's a simple metaphysical reality. Right? You know, we certainly believe at that moment you have new human life. And that new human life isn't going to become anything else but human, right? It's going to remain human. It's going to develop as a human being. Right? It doesn't magically turn into a human being at some other point in time. I mean, for example, we can certainly reference like Laura Clausen's, The Magical Birth Canal here. I mean, it's a great example. Where she shows the absurdity of the child going through the birth canal and how somehow it magically turns into a human being. That's obviously not the case, right? We know at the moment of conception, and again, I'm not alone in saying this. This is something that over 95% of biologists agree upon, that at the moment of conception, you have a unique new member of the species Homo sapiens. You have a new human being, right? And so it's just interesting. And even philosophically, we could sit there and certainly make a very powerful argument as to why this is a human being. It has a human nature. It only is going to be human. It's going to develop into a human and so forth. And so I think it's important for us to go out there and educate these legislators on these particular points. We've got to understand that in many ways, the in vitro fertilization industry has been largely unregulated, and it's highly problematic. All right, we really need to ask ourselves. We certainly see people out there praying, before abortion clinics. We certainly need to see pro-life forces out there praying before in vitro fertilization clinics as well, because life is created there and life is destroyed there pretty frequently. And if we were to ever get numbers of how many human embryonic children are destroyed for various whatever reasons, I think a lot of us would be horrified. I think pro-lifers in general would be especially horrified if they were to ever see those numbers. So I think it's vitally important for us as advocates to go out there, educate our legislators, educate our governors, and truly when we present them with evidence about how a bill is not pro-life and how even it's blatantly, basically a bill endorsing eugenics, then they can do something, right? Then they have, the wherewithal, the intellectual wherewithal to basically say, this is not a good bill. This bill is contra life. This bill is not for the common good because it doesn't promote virtue. It promotes vice. It promotes an injustice. It promotes something that is contrary to human nature. We're here to help protect life, all life, even in its most earliest stages, even in its most simplest forms. We're here to protect human life. And so I think it's important to go out there and educate people on these sorts of things. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this particular edition. Again, stay safe, especially during this Easter weekend. We appreciate everything that you do. Give us a big thumbs up. And, don't ever forget to subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it all. Anyway, have a blessed weekend. Have a blessed Easter. God bless.